This video focuses on persuasive content development for experts when they write. I'll explain 3 elements involved in persuasive prose. I'll help you understand how important these principles are for experts when discussing the content of a business plan written by a manufacturing company called Fabrica. You may remember this situation from the video on developing informative prose. As a reminder of the rhetorical context of the message, we determined that Fabrica's primary purpose is directive, like all business plans. The writer wants the audience to act. We agreed that we lack information about any existing writer-audience relationships, and that power seems relatively balanced. The audience of potential investors is not ready to accept Fabrica's message and has relatively low expertise, which we addressed when learning about techniques for developing informative prose. In addition to building up the audience's knowledge, the writer also needs to address some skepticism or sensitivity to Fabrica's message. That will require persuasive prose. Some knowledge of the elaboration likelihood model, or ELM, is useful in planning how to persuade an audience. The model was developed by 2 social psychologists. It predicts there are 2 routes to persuasion: the central route and the peripheral route. The central route occurs when the audience is motivated or willing. These readers have the ability to think critically about a message. They can see the core or the heart of the message. People persuaded through this route tend to have stronger attitude changes. They're easier to persuade. On the other hand, the peripheral route occurs when the audience is either unwilling or unable to analyze a message. They tend to see the surface of the message. Persuasion depends on superficial cues, things like attractiveness or credibility of the source, rather than on the quality of the argument. So what route is persuasion most likely to take for the group of investors reading Fabrica's business plan? If you said peripheral, I agree with you, in part. I do also believe investors expect the message to teach them enough to be persuaded by the central route about Fabrica's plan. They need to think critically, but probably can't without the writer's help. Let's consider a specific example from that message. Take a minute to read this passage. The first element of persuasive prose I want to present is the use of an explicit claim. Did you identify a claim in this passage? You probably struggled a little. That's because the writer did not actually state the claim explicitly. How about the sentence I've placed in the black box? Including it in this passage will make it easier for readers whether they're persuaded by either the central or peripheral route. The writer of this business plan could increase readiness of the audience by providing an explicit claim as shown here, especially at the beginning of the passage. I'll discuss organization of claims at length in the video on bottom line messages. Take a minute to read another passage from that business plan. The second element of persuasive content I want to emphasize is evidence. Let's consider how evidence enhances persuasiveness. If the writer adds the evidence shown in the black box here, the audience should be more willing to accept their claim because the audience sees authoritative and verifiable evidence that the market is large. The evidence is authoritative because it comes from a reputable source with specific expertise in textile production. The evidence is verifiable because the audience could see the evidence for themselves if they wanted. These 2 qualities should persuade readers to process the message through the central route. I should note that the evidence is also relevant because textile production is a way of measuring the size of the market. This evidence is less likely to persuade readers who are using the peripheral route. As another example, if the writer adds the evidence shown in the second black box, the audience should be even more willing to accept their claim because the audience sees timely and relevant evidence that the market wants the business's product. The evidence is timely because it comes from current users. The evidence is relevant because it deals specifically with sales of Fabrica's products. Although timeliness matters in peripheral persuasion, relevance is often impossible for those readers to judge and thus is not persuasive. To persuade an unwilling audience, writers must provide effective evidence supporting their claims based on their analysis of that audience. The third element of persuasive content deals with making the interpretation of evidence explicit. That interpretation is also sometimes called the warrant. This version of the passage we viewed earlier now has both an explicit claim and supporting evidence. Let's consider how interpretation enhances the persuasiveness. Part of the writer's claim is that the market for Fabrica's product is large. That claim is supported by evidence of the size of the potential market. However, the audience doesn't care a bit how large the market is unless Fabrica can capture a portion of it with their product. The writer will be far more persuasive if the passage includes an explicit interpretation or warrant of the evidence that takes this into account. The warrant shown here, by 2026 we can sell 1 out of every 5 production runs, connects the writer's claim about the size of the market to the evidence by stating the criteria by which the audience can evaluate that evidence. It's only effective evidence if it connects to the potential of Fabrica's product. Making that connection clear will make it easier for readers to be persuaded by the central route. Before I conclude with the interpretation of evidence, I want to talk about anticipated objections. Take a minute to read another passage from Fabrica's business plan. How could anticipating an audience objection at this point in the document help the writer be more persuasive? In this case, the writer has made an explicit claim. There are 4 reasons for the business to sell fabric samples instead of looms. The 4 reasons focus on the negatives. The potential investors might be thinking just because there are challenges to loom sales doesn't mean that there's no market for looms. In the black box, the writer voices that objection by stating, what our target group wants is not additional machines in their mills, and then dismisses this objection by adding what they want is quick quality samples at low cost. Thus, the writer enhances the persuasiveness of this passage by dismissing the audience's potential objections to their claim. Knowledge of your audience's potential objections to the claims you want to make is critical if you want to make them willing to accept those claims. That's true whether they're persuaded by the central or peripheral route. To get the readers ready to accept their message, especially those readers who are skeptical or sensitive, experts must develop persuasive prose to build a case for accepting their message. The clarity and strength of the claims that you make can lead the audience to attribute higher competence and credibility to you. The elements I've covered in this video will help you only if you know what your audience thinks and needs. You must predict accurately. As you've heard me say before, sometimes writers must talk to their audience in order to learn what those needs are.